Welcome to the program. It is Josh Ward. I'm Dave Hooker, Josh Ward of the Sports Animal. You can hear him noon to 3. Follow him on the Twitter at Josh_Ward. We're going to break down Tennessee's standing in the college football playoff and remind you to hit like, subscribe, and share. And it's brought to you by Zool Beer Company, xulbeer.com, zoolbeer.com. And Josh, let's go ahead and start with the College Football Playoff Committee saying that Tennessee is number 5. For those that are still suffering from battered ball syndrome, I think it's time to move past that. I thought the national community and the College Football Playoff Committee showed Tennessee the respect that Tennessee has been looking for. They're the highest rated one-loss team. What did you think of the Vols being at 5?
Tennessee is exactly where I thought Tennessee would be. Tennessee is in a very good position to try to make the playoff now that it has a loss on its resume. And I would just remind everybody, with reaction to Tuesday night rankings when they come out, there are 4 weeks of football to be played. A lot of things are going to change from what we're talking about right now. And a lot of that is likely to help Tennessee. I think it's unlikely TCU wins out. If TCU wins out, TCU deserves to be in the playoff. I don't want to hear any kind of resume debate because going 13-0 is so hard in college football, especially if you're in a Power 5 conference. So if TCU wins out, they'll be in the playoff and they will deserve to be. If they lose, they won't. And Tennessee's going to jump up a spot. The Pac-12 will have a spot potentially. The only way I think Tennessee fans could totally get jobbed here is if Ohio State and Michigan play their game. It's close. One team loses a close one. They say, you know what? It's so close, you both get in. You know, that would end up rubbing people along the wrong way, deservedly so. Everything else, I think, will work itself out because we know these teams have to play in the Pac-12. You know, USC is a team to not forget about, but it's also going to be difficult for USC to win out. I still think the same is the case for Oregon. Clemson already helped you. Bama helped you. LSU's a team to talk about, but let's see LSU run the table the rest of the way, including beating Georgia, before you worry about a 2-loss LSU getting in. So I think Tennessee's in a good position, and I don't think there's too much to worry about. There are teams to pull against, no doubt about it. You're a University of Texas fan this weekend if you're a Tennessee fan, because if Texas knocks off TCU, they've knocked out TCU.
Agreed. Would it get interesting with LSU with 2 losses if they won the SEC championship game, which I think you alluded to? I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think you do either. Yeah. But let's just say that did and they beat Georgia. Maybe LSU gets in with 2 losses and Tennessee with 1. I don't even see that because Tennessee beat LSU. Like you said, I don't see a scenario where if Tennessee wins out and plays well, other than TCU running the table and the Ohio State-Michigan close game, that Tennessee doesn't get in the Final Four.
Yeah, to me, the biggest one is TCU. If TCU wins out, then Tennessee could potentially have a problem because you could have a 1-loss Pac-12 champ go in. You could have TCU, Ohio State, or Michigan, and then obviously Georgia. To LSU, if LSU runs the table, yes, then I think you could potentially have a problem there. I just find that so unlikely. I think it's more likely that LSU loses this week in Arkansas than wins out, including a win against Georgia in the SEC title game. I will also say that I thought Bama would win last week, and it didn't happen. LSU was able to get that win, but all these games aren't in Baton Rouge, this upcoming weekend, and then the SEC title game, of course. So if I'm wrong, let's say LSU wins out, then yeah, I think LSU is going to have a really good case to the committee because that means they will have beaten Georgia, the team that just about everybody agrees is the best team in the country. They will have beaten Alabama, and they will have run through the SEC West. Now, the head-to-head for Tennessee would be the only case, right? Because the resume for LSU otherwise I think would be stronger. I know there's the second loss, but it would be week 1 on a PAT at the end of the game against FSU in the first game with a new head coach, and that would be easy to explain away. The committee might look at it and say, well, Tennessee went to overtime with Pitt, so the difference is a missed PAT with a chance to win in overtime versus winning in overtime against maybe a worse ACC team. So Tennessee would pitch the head-to-head. LSU would pitch much better resume with better wins, which would be difficult to argue against, and LSU would be the SEC champ. The other follow-up I've heard is, well, we've never seen a 2-loss team get into the playoff. That is true. playoffs been around for 8 years. It's not like we have decades
Right.
of history here. Auburn in 2017, if it had won the SEC title game, was expected to go to the playoff. It just lost. So that's the scenario we're talking about. Auburn was a 2-loss team, had beaten Alabama in the regular season, lost to Georgia, then Bama was able to slide back in. That's the scenario you're hoping for if you're Tennessee, that LSU, assuming it gets in as a 2-loss team, that it's unable to beat the better team, it gets knocked out, and Tennessee takes that 4th spot.
Yeah, I think one of the things that perhaps helps Tennessee, and 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 this is, I think, how you watch a football game. If you look at the score and you didn't watch the first minute to the 60th minute and you just kind of saw the highlights, and let's face it, these committee members are supposed to watch them all, do they? I don't know. But the score definitely looks different than, and it was a different game than the way Georgia beat Oregon. So even though both were sound beatings, in my opinion, one was much more sound than the other. If it comes down to Tennessee, Oregon, if it's that simple, then that's what I would point to if I were a committee member.
Well, I don't know about that. If I don't know that the committee's going to look at that, because I do think they're going to value a championship, and
Okay.
I think that's going to be weighted. Now, is it everything? No, it's not. And I agree that Georgia beat Oregon worse than Tennessee, but much more. I don't know. I mean, it was
Was
a
it
beating.
not?
Yeah, it
Was
was
it
a beating.
night and day?
Yeah, it was a
Was
beating on the field. Everybody knew the deal in the 4th quarter. So I get the point there. When the committee is saying that they don't see a big difference in how soundly it was, like in the 4th quarter, did anybody think it was a competitive game watching it? I haven't heard anybody say, you know what? I really felt good about the chances. I haven't heard that yet. So I agree it was worse on Oregon's side, but line of scrimmage, it was clear who the better team was. Lining up being the more physical football team, it was clear. Now it was in Athens and the environment that I would maybe factor in. I know that it was home like for Georgia with where the game was played against Oregon, but it was not Sanford Stadium with that crowd as fired up as we've seen in a Georgia home game. That to me would be the difference versus the way the game was played on the field. Both teams, Tennessee and Oregon, got beaten up pretty good.
We have talked about throughout this season the teams that could make the college football playoff. And we've also talked about how things seem to be breaking the right way for Tennessee, whether it be a bye week after a big win or a UT Martin after a big win, whether it be a quarterback at Alabama named Bryce Young, who was beat up, still played fantastic. But we've talked about how these little factors have fallen in Tennessee's favor.
Mm-hmm.
The big picture factor, Josh, I don't think there's an elite team this season. I think there are a bunch of very good teams. Georgia may prove me wrong, but I don't think there's an elite team that you point to and say, man, it doesn't matter if you face them or not. If it's college football playoff, you're going to get hammered.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's for the most part true. Georgia is the team that we would point to
Right.
that could prove us wrong in that. Is Georgia as good as last year? Yeah, I think Stetson's better. I think he's better at the quarterback position, which matters. They're not as overall talent wise as good on defense, but man, they can be disruptive. Last year, that team had the we're hunting a championship edge, but compared to the last few years, the elite teams we've seen, 2019 LSU, 2020 Bama. I don't see that this year in college football and beyond. Georgia. I don't see it. And it doesn't mean Georgia's going to win the title. By the way, Tennessee could beat Georgia in a rematch. I really think that could be a fair possibility. And I don't think anybody's saying Tennessee is an elite football team. Ohio State has a bunch of talent. Michigan has been really impressive overall to what it's done, but compared to the other teams, no. So if you bring it back to Tennessee, if Tennessee's able to get to the playoff, none of those teams, Georgia included, should scare Tennessee. Tennessee against Ohio State would have a really good shot. Tennessee against Michigan would have a really good chance. Certainly, Oregon or USC from the Pac-12. I would love Tennessee's chances. TCU. So for Tennessee, if you're able to get there, you have a chance to win the national championship. And Tennessee players should rightfully say, "Hey, we see Georgia. We're not seeing them in Sanford. They've got to beat us on a more comfortable environment for us." And now we've seen their best shot. The coaching staff, the players, they have a better idea of how to react in a more favorable setting. So if Tennessee's there, Tennessee's going to have not the best chance. Georgia's the favorite and should be, but the gap is not wide enough to where it should be a runaway for Georgia.
No, I agree. Josh's appearance brought to you by Zool Beer Company. Go to xulbeer.com for those of you listening on the audio format. You can see it right there if you're watching on the video format. And they've got great parking downtown. And Josh, they've got fantastic worldwide award winning craft beer.
Love Zool beer. Love the different options. The biggest thing is that you're going to go in with a different taste or preference than the next person that goes in with you. The setting's awesome, but the selection is really what makes the difference. So the IPAs, and that's where I would typically start. The Seltzer's really good, but different options. The Mexican lager has been a favorite in the Ward House too.
Yep, certainly check them out. And uh, Josh, I sense that this football team, and as soon as I say this, they'll lose to Missouri, but I sense they have the maturity to bounce back from a Georgia loss. I sense that they have that drive, kind of like you talked about. Last year's Georgia team had a championship drive.
Mhm.
This team may not have a championship drive, but they have a drive to prove people wrong, and I think they'll respond. Don't know 100%, but I think they'll respond in the final 3 games.
Yeah, I do too. I don't worry too much on Tennessee's side. Part of it is the competition. I mean, if Tennessee had to turn around and play heavy hitter, then I would be pretty worried here about the hangover effect. I just think Tennessee is a much better team than Missouri. You know, if Tennessee were having to go from Sanford Stadium to Columbia to play South Carolina on the road on a Saturday night, I would be a little worried. But that's not the case. I think it sets up favorably for Tennessee. It is senior day, and you do have to work through emotions before the game and then go out and play. But, Hendon Hooker, his maturity, I think that's something that helps. I think they have enough leadership on the defensive side. The offensive line, I think, is going to be motivated to get back out there after a rough day against Georgia and take out some of that frustration against Missouri. And you know what helps cure some frustrations? Big plays. And I think Tennessee will have a chance to hit some of those. Now, if the first half is a little bit slower and they don't have a really good start and all of a sudden you're in the middle of the game, maybe you start to say, "Uh-oh, do we have an issue here?" And you have to avoid mistakes that could give Missouri a little momentum. But going in terms of the psyche, in terms of Tennessee bouncing back and focusing on what they need to do in the next 3 weeks to get to 11-1 to have a shot at the playoff, I don't really worry about Tennessee at all.
Going back to the college football playoff committee, they shouldn't factor this in, but they're going to, whether or not they say they will. Tennessee is one of the established programs that college football is better when they're good. They also are a good story because you don't see a lot of teams kind of come out of nowhere. Tennessee was thought to be a 7, 8, 9 win team, and they're going to be better than that. I think those factors that are off the field play in Tennessee's favor as well.
Yeah, I think that helps. Tennessee is a big brand, and Tennessee is a team that we've already seen the committee favors. They got the number one spot in the initial playoff ranking last week. That doesn't mean everything, but that already tells us the committee thinks very highly of what Tennessee is doing. If Tennessee looks good the next 3 weeks, and there's no question how good that resume is, that plus the story has to help. Who are we comparing Tennessee to? Again, if TCU wins out, then TCU's taking a spot, and that makes things really challenging because then it could be Tennessee versus Oregon or USC for a spot, and USC's a story with Lincoln Riley,
Mhm.
and that brand is a big deal. And you'd have West Coast attention because if you leave out the Pac-12 champ, well, you've just cut off a part of the country, right? In terms of interest in the playoffs. So part of it depends on who we're looking at. Maybe it's shades of the Heisman, but I think there is fear among some Big Orange Nation members that there'll be Big Ten bias. I don't sense that. I don't sense that they're going to look at Tennessee versus Ohio State or Michigan, the loser, and think, you know what, the Big Ten, the second Big Ten team deserves the side here. Both situations, talking about teams from the same division, right? With Georgia and Tennessee, and then Ohio State, Michigan. If it's a really competitive game and it's close, and the road team loses one that it could have won, they might say, "Well, they were on the road." That would be your fear, as I mentioned earlier. But in terms of Tennessee's branding and the storyline and Hendon Hooker and everything that this offense has done, that works in Tennessee's favor, in my opinion.
Speaking of the Heisman, who would you vote for today?
I would really prefer not to cast my vote, which obviously you're not going to.
You're not supposed to.
Yeah,
People used to FedEx their votes in
yeah,
the
insanity.
beginning of November.
Yeah. I don't think there's an obvious choice right now, and I don't mean that as a cop out. Like you could choose Hendon, that's fine. Odds are in favor of C.J. Stroud, but part of that is the team's record. I think May at North Carolina should get more attention. His numbers are crazy. They're a one-loss team. They actually have a far out shot here because they're a one loss team in the ACC. I don't think they're going to get there, but Caleb Williams is in the mix. I've wondered, can Corum get a shot here, running back at Michigan? But if I had to choose someone today, Dave, I honestly would have. I would have a very difficult time. You could say Hendon Hooker. I could say C.J. Stroud, and somebody could walk in and say Caleb Williams or Bo Nix, and we could all lay out numbers that are comparable. None are obviously better. The one thing I've wondered with Hendon Hooker is can he beat out an undefeated C.J. Stroud? And I'm skeptical there. If Ohio State wins out, my guess is that it's C.J.'s award. But if Michigan beats Ohio State, I think it's really interesting. And whoever has the best final 3 to 4 weeks here will win the award. There's an opportunity for Hendon to roll up some numbers against these opponents. Missouri's better than it was last year defensively, but shouldn't be good enough to stop this Tennessee offense. So Hendon still has a really good chance. He could have wrapped it up with a big game and a win against Georgia. Obviously, that didn't happen, but this is as wide open I think is it should be at least with all the names that I've thrown out, and there are a couple other we could include in the conversation, is wide open as I think it should be with 3 to 4 weeks to go compared to anything we've seen here in the past few years.
With this scenario, Hendon Hooker averages 350 yards passing in the next 3 games. Ohio State loses to Michigan by 1 point and 1 point only. It's a close game, but
Yeah.
Stroud plays great. Who do you vote for?
Probably Hendon.
Yeah, me too.
Probably.
But just
Um,
probably. Not
yeah.
100%, but just probably. Me too.
Yeah, and I wouldn't rule out some of those other guys, honestly. Like the award's supposed to be the best player in college football, right? I don't know who the best player in college football is to this point. Like part of my thought has been that it's Bryce Young. He's not winning the Heisman. I thought after Tennessee's loss, hey, here's Bryce's chance to charge back, but he needed more help from his teammates, and the team hasn't won enough. Isn't it funny? We're talking about a two-loss Alabama team, and they're just out, right, for their player to win the Heisman. Obviously, he won last year, but Nix has a real shot. If I mentioned the branding of USC, if USC wins out, well, Caleb Williams is going to have big-time numbers for that to happen, most likely, and he's going to have a real shot at the Heisman because if USC comes charging and Caleb Williams is leading the way, that position, Lincoln Riley's guy, then don't count him out either.
Well, you get 3 choices. I can't see how, if you watch a lot of college football, that Bryce Young isn't one of the 3. For any voter out there, to me,
Mm-hmm.
he is. And I know we're talking about Alabama, and this sounds insane, but their skill position guys ain't great, especially if not for Jahmyr Gibbs transferring in.
Yeah,
Man,
there's no dynamic player at receiver that scares an opposing defense.
no,
They have
and
good players, but not good enough to make a big difference.
yeah, and they don't want to give it to the same guy 2 times in a row. Most people don't.
Mm-hmm.
I get that, but if you talk about most outstanding player, he has to be in the conversation, but I don't think he has been for some reason.
Yeah, no, so and part of that is, I think there's with all these guys, and I think that helps Hendon because his numbers could still be terrific, and you're talking about an 11-1 Tennessee football team. That's a requirement here. If Tennessee loses another game, well, they're out of the playoff, and Hendon's out of the Heisman race, at least in terms of a chance to win. He could still end up in New York, but he's not going to win it if Tennessee loses another game, I don't think. The other name that we haven't talked about, but is starting to get a little bit of attention because he does have that undefeated team too, is Stetson Bennett. I don't think he's winning, but I wouldn't be surprised if he is there in New York because he's the quarterback for the number 1 team. He's a really good player. I mean, he was the better quarterback on Saturday, right? Him versus Hendon Hooker, but I still don't see Stetson. I don't see his numbers being there for people to give him the Heisman.
Well, the good news is we all have his phone number, so we could call and congratulate him if he wins.
If Tennessee sees Georgia again in the playoff, do not call Stetson Bennett. Do not text him. Do not give any extra motivation to the Georgia Bulldogs because you have seen what they do with it.
Right before you and I started working together, I found the media hotel for the Major League Baseball All-Star game, and I said, "May I speak to Bob Costas?" And he picked up the phone, and I said, "Could we get you on the radio?" He goes, "Yes. And I've learned to never use my name with a hotel again." So we did get him on the radio, but that was the last time he ever used the name Bob Costas at a hotel. So we got several other all-star players who learned the same lesson as well. That was an interesting day.
Yeah, I use the name Dave Hooker, but nobody ever calls when I'm at the hotel.
Good stuff. Yeah, good stuff. Josh is on WNML in Knoxville from noon to 3. He throws heat every day, like that pitcher we got on from the AL that I can't even remember his name back in the day. So, Josh,
Clemens?
what's that?
Roger Clemens? Is that who it was?
I don't know. We didn't get a big name. We got a bunch of dudes who are just kind of in the all-star game for maybe their first and last time, and Bob
Right.
Costas. So he was the biggest name that I remember. I don't remember any of the other ones. But he is Josh Ward, brought to you by Zool Beer Company, xulbeer.com. This has been a presentation of Off the Hook Sports.